Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It is Wednesday evening, so I'm recording these earlier than I normally would because I'm trying to free up some time to do some crazy deep dive testing for an upcoming video that hopefully you all will enjoy. But anyway, hopefully there was enough time for everybody to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up on Floatplane, Shorjor wanted to follow up on the conversation from last week about CRT storage and said that temperature where these are going to be stored shouldn't be an issue, and they've never seen spiders or mice in their equipment, so it might not be of concern here. So spiders, obviously, that's a big deal because they can get into any little spots, but mice could actually be worse because for the most part, you wouldn't see mice unless it was really, really bad. You would see droppings and you would smell everything that comes with that. And that's, in my opinion, just as bad because if a mouse pees and poops all over your CRTs, not only are they going to reek, they're going to be contaminated. And that's something that you don't want to have to deal with. So that's why my wrap it in plastic idea, if something happened to that, when you cut the plastic off, your inside is still good. The mice still could potentially be an issue. A friend of mine had them crawl into the porthole in the back of one of their speakers and build a nest in it, and it destroyed the speaker. That was a crazy story, but that actually happened. So you're gonna watch out for that stuff. So yeah, I would just keep an eye on it, keep it elevated if possible. I think I may have forgotten that last week. Even if you're up in an attic somewhere, you're not going to worry about flooding. Well, I guess maybe if the roof leaks, but you're not going to worry about water coming up from below. But having it on top of something will make it less of a welcoming thing for animals and stuff to crawl into. But who knows? I mean, your setup should actually be perfect. Also, Shorjor said they just ordered some light guns, a Time Crisis 2, and a link cable to set up a Time Crisis co-op setup for the next Pixel Party. What's my favorite light gun game? Well, that's a good question. I think if I had to pick one, it would be Missile Defense 3D because it's ridiculous. It's 8-bit 3D missiles flying at your face, and level 1 is easy, but each level ramps up the difficulty a lot. So if you're somebody that gets bored just playing the same thing over and over, you really got to only play it for a minute or two, and then it's a challenging game again. So I like it. I always like Duck Hunt too, but the arcade version, which you could play it with via ROM carts if you wanted, of course, but the arcade version ramps up in difficulty, but the home version takes forever to get hard, and I kind of get bored. So yeah, I think that one's fun, but actually to sit down and play, like not just kill 5 minutes having some fun with some 3D missiles flying at my face. I don't know, that's a good one. I loved Lethal Enforcers as a kid, and I really put some serious effort into that one. I never beat it, not even close, but I don't know. That's a great question. I think I would have to really think about that one because light gun games for me are more of like the arcade type of thing. You want to play for a couple of minutes, you have fun, and you walk away. But I don't think I've ever actually put real time into Time Crisis 2. So maybe I should give that and Virtua Cop a try someday and see what happens. But good question. Moving over to Patreon, a random cast wanted to follow up on the discussion about a PC monitor versus a TV dilemma for their console corner, and they ended up going with a modern 32-inch 1080p LG TV. They looked at anything that would have game mode features to limit the input lag as much as possible, and they ended up with one of those. Now they try to even use it with their PC. It truly revived their entertainment corner for movies and games. It's mounted on a boom arm, so it could swivel to point to their bed whenever they want to watch movies or play anything on a controller from their bed, and they love it. And they also added a small CRT for the PS1 and 2 to have that as well. So I think that is an awesome setup. I absolutely love it. And I do think that depending on your total setup, getting something that's 1080p 60 and really low latency might actually be better in most cases. Unfortunately, they don't make 1080p 60 OLED gaming monitors. Otherwise, that would have been a giant, first choice for a situation like that, but that's just not a thing. It's actually something I have to touch upon in this upcoming video because when you're stuck with 120 hertz or higher, you always have to compromise. Sometimes it doesn't matter and the compromise is what you would have wanted anyway, but it's still something you have to think about. So just getting a 1080p 60 32-inch TV is probably awesome and you don't have to worry about that stuff. And good job throwing a CRT in for 480i stuff so you don't have to worry about deinterlacing or any of that. Also, a random cast just wanted to shout me out as well as Metal Jesus. So thank you very much for your kind words. And also, Jason is a really good dude. So it's always nice. I try to promote everybody that does good work, but I try to double promote people that do good work and are also cool people too, which, I guess if I truly was unbiased, I wouldn't say that, but I mean, I'm only human. So when somebody's cool and does good stuff, I'm in 100%. So yeah, shout out to Jason from me as well, I guess. Next up, Heinrich is running 12 consoles using RGB SCART into an SVS switch. Some are PAL, some are NTSC, and from there, a SCART output goes into their 32-inch consumer CRT, and the other output doesn't go anywhere yet, but they plan on adding a TINC 4K CE later on in order to complete a proper dual monitor setup, which will be fed into a 1080p Panasonic plasma. Sounds awesome. A couple of questions though. First, they want to add a 13th console to the mix, a PlayStation 1, but due to being severely space constrained, they can't simply add another SCART input module to their SVS. It's just because it's mounted in a cabinet that's not wide enough for anything else. So they're wondering if there's a decent quality solution for making 2 SCART inputs out of 1. So yes and no. Any extra SCART switch that you're going to put into this could potentially kill the quality. I have seen basic push button 1 to 2 SCART switches that are bidirectional that you could do either way. So either switch between 2 inputs going to 1 or 1 input going to 2 outs. And it's essentially the same as unplugging and replugging SCART cables. And that's safe because it's not dual output. You would have to decide which one you want at the same time. It's not dual simultaneous output. Sorry. So yeah, that would totally work, but you'd have to find one, eBay in Europe is probably a good place for that, and just plan on doing some testing. Run it plugged directly into the setup for a couple minutes, then put the switch in its place and see if you see any differences. If you have any version of the 240p test suite, that would be a great way to test it as well. Another thing you could do is if you have a PS1 and a PS2, you could just put them in the same area in your setup and just unplug and replug the SCART cable itself into the back of the console. That way you're leaving the switch mounted where it is and you're just kind of moving the SCART cable between the two. It's not the most elegant solution, but it's free and it would totally work with no interference or anything like that. So you'll have to kind of think about that one. Second question, they noticed strange behavior in their consumer CRT with vertically scrolling 2D titles. So did you rotate the games first or are you rotating the CRT? That could be a part of it, but let me continue. The image seems to be a little squished at the top and bottom while being a bit inflated in the central region of the screen. It feels like a hump in the middle of the screen the image needs to roll over, similar to an actual physical scroll. Is there anything they could do about it on their end? So when you're talking about things like arcade monitors and consumer CRTs, they don't have the same control as professional video monitors. And especially with things like arcade monitors, they were meant to be dialed in for each board that's being displayed on it. And every retro gaming console outputs a slightly different signal, and every arcade board outputs a very different signal often. So you're going to run into that stuff with consumer CRTs, and it might be something you could troubleshoot and fix. It might not, though. That's one of those weird things. And your final question is, they noticed that 240p and 288p content is displayed slightly smaller on the tube than 480i or 576i. Do I think this could be remedied by revising the TV electronics? Or is the best option to dial the potentiometers in that middle ground for both resolutions? So you have a choice to make now. Your TV sounds amazing, but it's a consumer grade TV, so it's never going to have the same controls and overall geometry as like a PVM. And PVM and BVMs don't have perfect geometry either. They're just better than consumer. And if you start messing around with all that stuff, you have to make sure the capacitors are okay, because you could tune it to bad capacitors. A year or two goes by, the caps get worse, you eventually change them, and then you have to really start messing with all the settings. So is this a TV that you had planned on restoring anyway? And if the answer is yes, do that first, then mess around with all of this other stuff. If the answer is no, if it's like, no, I got super lucky, I found this at the dump of somebody's grandma, whatever, it's in mint condition, I'm just going to use it till it dies. Yeah, sure, mess around with the settings and just pay attention to it. visual examples, flashlight, making sure the caps aren't leaking, that type of stuff. Visual inspections, not visual examples. I'm sorry, it's tired. It's my first beer of the night and I'm already getting stuff wrong. I'm going to be sharp today. We'll see how well this one goes. But yeah, basically just kind of go about it from all right, let's make do with what I have. I'll mess with some of the settings, find a happy middle ground, see if I could fix stuff. But just understand that if components of the CRT are starting to go, you can't fix any of it. If it were me personally, I might mess around a little bit, but not too much, not unless I was really ready to take the plunge and do a recap and a calibration and all of that stuff. But that's got to be completely up to you. But sounds like an awesome setup. 3 questions from Fred R. First, they're adding a MiSTerPi to their retro setup. The website shows it could support dual RAM if you remove the AV version 1.2 board, which would remove a lot of features that they want to use. Their question is, what are they missing out on by only running 1 stick of RAM? Not much. So if you want to have access to the Atari Jaguar core's full features, to the Saturn core's extra features, there's a few things like that where, especially if you're a developer, you might be interested in that. Or if you're a hardcore fan of any of the cores that use that, then sure. But if not, at the moment, almost all the cores are totally playable with single RAM. And it's not something I personally would worry too much about. So I would kind of just do some research and see what you would really gain per core and see if it's worth it to you. But it's not really something to put too much thought into unless you're like, oh, that arcade board, I think there's only 1 or 2, or, that feature from that core, that's really important to me. If it's not for that, then I wouldn't worry about it. Next question is, will the MiSTerPi output 240p component video out of that VGA connector and output HDMI video in whatever format's best for a TINC 4K? So I believe so. I think if you set direct video output, but you also set composite video equals 1 and set the output to RGB, you get direct video out of the HDMI port, and then you also just get standard 240p out of the VGA port. For component video, you would want to change the video mode from RGB to, I believe, YPBPR. I would still leave composite sync as 1. And you definitely would have to flip a sync on green switch. And that's what I don't know if the MiSTerPi IO board has. That's something that you should be able to check the specs to see. But as long as it has that physical switch on the IO board, all of that should work totally fine. And last question, they need an HDMI splitter for their setup. They're planning to have a switch to PS5 and their PC plugged into their TV, and that leaves them with only 1 HDMI port for the MiSTer, PS3, 360, and Wii U. Do I know of a good HDMI switch that's at least 4x1 to help with that? So some people had given me recommendations over the years, but all the ones that I had done deep dive testing on are unfortunately not available anymore, which stinks for everybody because I put a ridiculous amount of time into testing those and was hoping to have those affiliate links just up and running for a while. But no, that was a huge fail for everybody, unfortunately. So I'll see if I could leave a link to one that other people had suggested, but the cheaper HDMI equipment tends to change a lot. So you might just want to jump on Amazon and just pick up whatever's the cheapest one that you could find and just test it right away. And the unfortunate thing is you'll have to test it for long periods of time. Quick example, I'm testing a new HDMI splitter, 1 in, 2 out, that could go up to 4K 120, basically to replace the amazing one that I've been using for years now. And before I even dug into MiSTer testing to MD4A audio, before I did any of that, I plugged it into this setup and I put it between my streaming TV box and my TV. And I'm just simply using it as if it's not even there. And so far it hasn't failed at all. But a lot of the switches that I tested, I spent a lot of money and a lot of time buying these switches. And luckily I was able to return all the really bad ones. But sometimes, often in fact, I would get 40 minutes into a 48-minute TV show, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the screen would go black. A couple seconds later, it would come back, almost as if somebody ran over and unplugged and replugged the HDMI cable. So that's what you really got to work out or watch out for, because other stuff you'll be able to find immediately. You plug it all in and it doesn't like your MiSTer, it doesn't like your OSSC, whatever else, fine, you'll know immediately, but you're going to have to use it for a couple hours before you know if you get dropouts. So I'm telling you that just to warn everybody listening. Whenever you test that kind of stuff, use it right away so that you get to test it before the return period's over. A Couple of questions from Doug T. First, is there an HDMI switch with maybe 18 to 20 inputs I could recommend? They find that as their HDMI console list grows, the more issues they have with using multiple daisy-chained HDMI switchers. Absolutely. You have problems like signal not changing at all or not remembering which one is which, and when that happens, not wanting to go through the jungle that is the cabling behind their setup. Excellent question, but no, I don't personally know of one. And when you start getting to that many inputs, you're talking about multi-$1,000 HDMI switches, because generally those are used in broadcast rooms or some kind of distribution center. So if you got a lot of money to spend and have a budget for something like this, check out Extron matrix switchers for HDMI stuff. But I don't really have any solution for you whatsoever for that one. The only thing you could do is get a couple of 8x1 switches, maybe 16x1. I think you could get 16x1s for a couple of hundred. 8x1s, I think you could get for about 100. Same caveats as what I just explained with the other one. You want to make sure to use it for lengthy periods of time before you decide that's it. So maybe just do 2 setups and use 2 inputs on your TV or something like that. That's going to be a tough one. You're going to have to kind of figure out your total overall solution and see what would match best for that, but there's no easy answer for that one. I wish the community could make something like that, but there's a lot involved in making HDMI equipment, including some of the licensing terms to use the HDMI chips themselves. It really is like the epitome of gatekeeping and monopolies, but whatever, that's too big of a fight for me to fight. Next question is, does anybody else have issues with HDMI modded consoles not always displaying when not plugged directly into the TV? Most work fine, but their early Kevtris NES and Ultra HDMI both seem to sporadically just not want to show up or send a signal until either they replace the cable completely or plug it in directly to the TV. So yes, that's common. And the issue probably isn't the cable. It could be. So always good to check that first, because if it turns out to be it, just always, cable HDMI cables, good HDMI cables are very cheap these days compared to what they used to be. So you could always have one lying around in a drawer to try out for testing. But it's usually the off timing signals that are sent by these retro consoles. Because when analog video was the only video, it was incredibly tolerant. CRTs would basically accept any signal within the refresh rate max and just spit it out onto the screen. And it wouldn't really matter if it was 5994, 5997, 582, whatever else. But digital stuff has to follow a very strict guideline in order for it to work. So when you're converting retro gaming signals into HDMI, it often won't work right without a buffer. And a little side note, that's why the RetroTink 4K, and I think the Morph as well, ships in the highest latency mode, which neither are very high latency, by the way, but just saying they ship that way because that's the most compatible mode. Because the whole thing is you don't want somebody to spend a lot of money, plug it into your TV and have it not work. So running stuff like that through another scaler like the Tink 4K would solve it, but you might end up having to just find an HDMI switch that's always going to be compatible with it. Or what I used to do for the very cheap 5x1 HDMI switch I used for years, I would switch, I'd had it labeled. So quite literally like a piece of painter's tape with a magic marker written on it or something like that. And I would set it to the input first, power on the console. And if it blipped out, I would unplug and replug the power from the switch. And then it usually worked. Not always, but 99% of the time. So that's an annoying workaround, but that definitely is something you could do. You could try to put the Ultra HDMI in a higher latency mode. I don't know. I don't remember if the Kevtris HDMI mod did that, but yeah, that's just something that you're going to have to deal with, and it's a total pain. Also, they said, longtime listener finally signed up for Patreon just to subscribe to RetroRGB. Thank you so much. That is really nice of you. I really appreciate it. I wish I had better answers for your HDMI stuff, but it's the best I got. DW623 is finally getting their first PVM, and it supports composite, S-video, and RGB. Since they're a complete noob to PVMs, they just want to make sure they know what they need to be able to route any of their retro and modern consoles to it. They tried to do as much research as they could, and they think they've got it, but they want to confirm. Will the RetroTink comp to RGB converter be plug and play for using PlayStation, GameCube, Xbox, and Wii cables in order to convert it to RGB SCART for the PVM? Yes, as long as you set all of those to 480i. because your average PVM will not support 480p. Maybe you got one of the 20L series or the 14L series, and if so, amazing. But if not, it's going to be 480i and 240p only, so you would have to set it to those. Next, good timing on that cheap HDMI to component converter. If they want to downscale an HDMI retro console like the Retro USB AVS or Analog Mega SG to play on that PVM, would that be all they need? No, because that will only go to 480i, not 240p. So it's just not going to look right. It's going to be flickery and weird. And, you know, if it was something like you wanted to leave it up for a demo or you're having a party and you wanted some fun things just playing in the background, fine. But to sit down and play, no, that wouldn't cut it. You would actually need real downscalers. And that's where you would want to go to Marco's downscaling section of the RetroRGB website. And you could get cheap solutions like the GBS Control, or you would want to get more of the higher end ones like the OSSC Pro or RetroTink 4K to do the downscaling. And 3, same question as 2, but something like the PS4 and PS5, changing that output to 1080p for the converter, would that work to the PVM? Yes, but aspect ratio. Just like I showed in those videos, it'll take that widescreen signal and smush it. So it'll be, if that is not something that bothers you, fine, but you're not able to center it the way you normally would. You would have to make sure that those consoles actually support a 4x3 output, and I don't think they do. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're 16:9 only. So you would have to use a different kind of downscaler that could go to either 480i or 240p, but center it properly. So you have the widescreen image in the middle and the black bars on the top and the bottom. Or for stuff like you were talking about before, like the Analog Mega SG, you would want it, zoomed properly to have it fill the screen. There's other tricks and stuff you could do, but not with cheap equipment. You're definitely going to want to get, if gaming on a CRT is important to you, that's where you want to spend some cash. So a GBS control is the easiest way to get into that. It's not the best solution, but it is by far the cheapest. So you could certainly start with that if you wanted to, but here's where I would kind of just plan on spending some time in Marco's section, just going through, reading through the pages, checking out some of the videos. But GBS control, OSSC Pro, RetroTink 5X or RetroTink 4K, those are what you're really going to want to concentrate on to see. Obviously, they're all different price points, but they all offer slightly different stuff. And maybe you'll find features on one that you love that you think, you know what, it's worth the money. Or maybe you'll just try the GBS control and see how you like it. But all of that could possibly be a win. So, and congrats on the PVM. I'm sure you're going to love it. Out of curiosity, what model is it? Apothecary 2 wants to know how I feel about bothering with trying CRTs and CRT shaders for modern pixel art games. These games do often come with their own typically bad CRT filters. Some people argue that blocky raw pixels is the intended art direction for those games now. Perhaps that quite a few of them recently have a resolution like 480 by 270 as their native resolution does suggest that these games are being made on and are made for 1080p displays specifically, but there are also games from studios like Joy Masher that seem to have their shading blend together really well with CRT visuals. So this is obviously just an opinion. There's no right answer for this other than don't stretch 4x3 to 16:9. But it's all about the game for me. And I remember playing Axiom Verge in 480p on an HD CRT and thinking it was ridiculously amazing. I definitely played around with some CRT filters on the Tink 4K with some of those, and some of it looked perfect to me, some of it not so much. Others could go either way. The last Axiom Verge 2, there were a couple of weird levels where there were some background effects that didn't really look right on CRTs. It just looked weird and messy. And it wasn't in every section. It was just like in this one like trippy section of the game, I guess is the best way to put it without spoilers. But other than that, it was amazing on a CRT. So, and therefore would have also been if you ran it to like through a, I forgot the name of the shader overlay that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, but software shaders or through the RetroTink 4K or something like that. So my suggestion is if people have the ability to try it, try it. Worst case, you spend a couple of minutes and you don't like it, especially the ones that are software based. Because if you're gaming on a PC monitor on a PC and you fire up a free piece of software, you make it full screen, you mess around with some different settings and you go, I don't like it. Well, you lost 5 minutes. it's fine. Go for it. Because the flip side is, what if you do that and you're like, wow, this is the perfect blend. This is, the perfect geometry of a flat panel. And, it's super easy to load all this stuff up, but it feels like I'm playing on a CRT. Both are complete wins. So it's my strong opinion that if you're interested in this stuff, just go for it. Find the cheapest way to test it out and see what happens. And this whole artist's intent thing, if you're buying their game and you're telling people that you like it and you like it with a certain filter on it, what artist in their right mind is going to tell you that you're wrong? So, that's kind of just my opinions on it. Rip Van Winkle has a couple of questions. And Rip, I read every word of these questions, but just in the interest of yours and everybody else's time, I'm going to skip to the answers. If I missed anything, my apologies. Please let me know. First, for doing capture in 444 lossless color space scaled to 1080p or 720p, do you need a Datapath Vision capture card for direct RGB capture, or could you use something like a GBS control or OSSC? And to be honest, once Marcus added fractional support for phase control to the OSSC, I almost never use the Datapath Vision for direct capture anymore. I do occasionally use it just to double check my results in the OSSC, but I just found it much easier to do it that way, and I've never seen a quality difference from it. OSSC is an incredible piece of hardware as long as you know how to use it and you're patient enough to figure all of this stuff out. Funny enough, though, the Datapath Vision cards, if anybody listening has one of them already installed and you're like, oh, I was doing direct RGB for a while, I guess I don't need the card anymore. No. The Datapath Visions are also fully compatible with stuff like the OSSC in 5X mode with the SNES, which is a very incompatible combination of things for your average capture card. So if you already own a Datapath, keep it. You could still use it, just use it for the digital side of things and only analog if you need to for whatever reason. I think the GBS control could probably do a good job as well, but I just love the control of the OSSC. And even though for gaming, I've moved on to the RetroTink 4Ks, when it comes to capture, I actually don't want any of those enhancements of the Tink 4K because I want raw captures of whatever the analog consoles are so I could analyze the signal and help developers and do these reviews and all that stuff. So it's actually one of the benefits of the OSSC just essentially being a line multiplier. So definitely go with that if that's what you're looking to do. Next, they'll be relying on the PixelFX HDMI mods for internal HDMI mods in their consoles. Are there any drawbacks to using those through the RetroTink 4K Pro? No, not at all. Set them to direct mode. Tink 4K Pro will do an amazing job, and especially with the 480i stuff. And overall, I think it would I obviously love that thing. Now, it's a lot more expensive than the Morph, and not everybody might need all those features. But if you do, or if you don't need them, but you really like them, then yeah, you're getting quite a lot with it. Next, when will I review the new Retro Access cables? Retro Access was recently bought by Kyle from Kaitour Industries. So I talk to Kyle all the time. He's a friend of mine. I'm a fan of all of his work. Obviously, I cover it on RetroRGB, but I told him to take those stinking cables. No, I'm kidding. In all seriousness, I think when somebody's starting out doing something as hard as cables, the worst thing that I could do is send a whole bunch of people his way on month one. I think that would cause more harm than good because Kyle is a perfectionist and wants these things to be as good as possible. So having just a normal amount of sales so they could go through, and if there's a bump in the road, they're able to stop and fix it and go from there. I think that's probably the best thing to do for now. The moment Kyle's like, okay, I'm ready, let's do this. Yeah, of course, I'm going to make sure to get the word out, talk about it. If anybody's listening to this, go right ahead, go to Retro Access and pick up whatever cables that you need. But as far as pushing them alongside of all the other ones that I do, I'm just going to wait for Kyle to tell me it's cool because I just don't want to overwhelm anybody, especially a perfectionist that doesn't want to make any mistakes at all and takes this stuff personally in a good way, not in a bad way. If there's an unhappy customer and it's a legit problem, that would bother Kyle. So he doesn't want to do that. But yeah, I talk to him all the time and hopefully that'll happen soon. Lastly, when will the scalable video switch accept pre-orders again? And is the edge enhancer from Voltar going to be back in stock? No clue on Voltar. I'm even having a hard time getting a hold of him. So I hope he's doing okay. I know, he spoke publicly about this, so I'm not outing him or anything, but he was having some health issues. So I have no idea. This is actually the least I've talked to Voltar in a decade, the past month or so. So I hope he's doing okay. As far as the SVS, I think on social media, Arthremis said something about trying to get injection molded cases done and wanting to make sure that they were all very high quality. But once those pre-orders were fulfilled, there should be stock in place just to start selling them. But I'm going by memory. It is kind of later here for especially for me to be recording off the cuff like this. So I could have completely gotten that wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's one of those things where it's probably going to take a couple more months, but then it should just be ready to kick back in. But you're probably going to want to check social media and the website just to double check on all of that stuff. Sir Chicken has a pitch for someone with the necessary skills to do this. Could someone code a Time Sleuth-like app for the Nintendo Switch, which uses the IR sensor of the right Joy-Con as an optical sensor, so you could lag test your total Switch setup? Yeah, but I don't think Nintendo would allow that because I don't think Nintendo wants people to really know what's going on with this stuff. Like, imagine you were able to do that and you had an app that just kind of floated around in the background and you could figure out that some of their Switch Online games had like 10 frames of lag and others didn't. They would hate that. So, while it's technically possible, I don't think you're going to see that on the Switch unless it's a jailbreak app, but we all know what Nintendo's been doing with those, so I don't even want to go there. But that's actually something I've talked to Artemio and Steve and a few people about over the years of trying to do total lag test setups. And you could do that with PCs now. I've used it and demoed it, and those are great. But on stuff like consoles, especially newer consoles, I just don't think that's going to be possible. I think you're going to need to use detailed tools like Nigel Whittle does. I still really want to interview Nigel as well, by the way. I think that would be a great person to talk to have a better answer to stuff like this. But technically it's possible, but my total guess is Nintendo would never allow it. Radio Mike first wants to follow up from a couple of weeks ago about not really liking filmmaker mode on the LG C4. And they ended up messing around with a bunch of the picture settings, but after all their complaining, wound up coming back to filmmaker mode. Yeah, I did too. I did the same thing. I truly think that some shows are just colored badly. Or it could just be that the weird color blindness that I have and have had my whole life just doesn't like the way certain things look. And everybody else in the room might think it looks totally fine, but it doesn't to my eyes. But I still think a couple of the ones I thought were bad were actually bad. Because I often ask my wife stuff like this when we're watching TV. Like, hey, is the TV all off or is it just me? And very often she'll be like, no, it's the whole thing's green. I don't know what's going on right now. So, then because I'm me, I got to stop, pause, check my cables. And very often it just turns out to be a badly colored TV show or an artist's intent that they wanted to make you feel green. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, they're setting up their RetroTink with 4K with their new C4, and they're a little confused. They were watching the Retro Enthusiast review video and making sure they had things set up correctly, which was going fine until BFI came into play. They don't use any scan lines on their picture. They were simply just planning on picking their favorite profiles, outputting 4K 60 to the C4. However, they got to the section where I tossed out that idea and couldn't figure out why I was saying 1080p at 120. So the way black frame insertion works, and I'm going to touch upon this a little bit in this upcoming video I'm incessantly nagging everybody talking about. I'm not going to do the deep dive until Mark from Blurbusters can give me a hand with it because I just don't want to mess it up. But I'll give you the short version now. The way 120 hertz displays work with 60 hertz signals, so 60 frames per second on a 120 frame per second TV, each one of those frames is played twice. And if you check out the YouTube short I did with boost mode, you could see where you could see the black line that's showing it drawing the same frame twice. And when you put it in boost mode, it sets it to a 60 hertz mode and it only draws it once. I'm telling you that because the way BFI works is instead of drawing the same frame twice, going from 60 to 120, it draws the frame once and then draws, quote unquote, draws a black frame next, and then moves on to the next frame in the sequence. So instead of 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, it would be 1 off, 2 off, 3 off. And that's what allows it to happen. So that's a long way of saying you can't use BFI on the RetroTink on a 120 hertz display unless the RetroTink is outputting 120 hertz. You could, now if you were using CRT emulation filters, you could output those in 4K 60 and let the LG C4 add the BFI, but then you're going to end up with more lag anyway, and it might not work right for you. And also, when I use Kuro's profiles and I set to 1080p, as long as I set the scaling to integer, so I like 1080p 5x, I think it looks perfect. Obviously, it's not as detailed as 4K, but to my eyes, that just looks amazing. So I have no problems with it that way. But if you're not using it, I just really wouldn't worry about that at all. So I guess that's basically it for your questions. I think that's what you need to know for the BFI and everything else, but please let me know if you want me to elaborate anymore. And I do really like when people ask the questions, and if I don't get it right, double down, because me getting it right here helps me get it right in these videos that I work on. So all of you are tremendous help to me in how I explain it to people. And also, with my weird broken brain, I completely understand that I could explain something perfectly to one person and then somebody standing next to that person might go, I have no idea what you just said. So I always like multiple ways of going about explaining things. And if it's not too long of an explanation, I try to throw different ways of going about it in the same video. And I've had lots of comments over the years like, I didn't know what you meant the first time, but good call saying it the second time. So please keep these questions coming and make sure to let me know if I don't get it right for you, because I want to learn how to get better, because this stuff is really cool. And I guarantee you, if you spend all this time figuring it out and you go, you know what, I don't really like BFI, you're not going to think it's a waste of your time. You're going to be glad that you got this knowledge, and now you're going to use that to try to make your setup even better. Or you might love it. Either way, hopefully I was able to point you in the right direction. Peter has a home arcade system supergun, a HAS, and the version with the 8-pin MiniDIN. And they have an 8-pin MiniDIN to HD15 cable, and they're looking to connect that into the OSSC, but they want to double check the pinout to make sure that everything is correct. They also saw that there might be 5 volts running from the MiniDIN output, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with this, and they don't want to fry their retro scalers. So by all means, good job just kind of waiting to see and asking the questions, because you never know. And my answer is a guess, but it's an educated guess, so I think I'm going to point you in the right direction. First, the 8-pin MiniDIN would have had voltage on it for people that were using those SCART cables into PAL CRTs that required voltage to switch into RGB mode. So without voltage on a SCART line on one of the pins in the SCART head, you just wouldn't be able to use RGB at all. It would default to composite, which the HAS doesn't output, so you would get no signal at all. Now, if you're using a converter that goes from this MiniDIN to HD15, they should only wire RGB, ground, and sync, and nothing else. If anybody wired anything else, that's a mistake. Once again, I'm guessing here. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but I genuinely cannot think of a single reason that anybody would want to do that, because if you're going to a D-sub connector, you don't need voltage on anything. So in that scenario, that cable should just simply be feeding red, green, blue, sync, and ground, and nothing else through it. So my guess is it's totally fine to go directly into an OSSC, but you might want to check the cable. And I don't think the MiniDIN would be the problem. I think it would be the cable that would be the issue. So definitely give that a try. Also, some not great news for you. The VGA input of the OSSC is routed in a way where it cannot access the low pass filter. So you're always going to have a little bit of noise and interference on screen that you wouldn't have if you got an 8-pin MiniDIN to SCART cable. So maybe this is just your excuse to get an the 8-pin MiniDIN, I almost said HD15, 8-pin MiniDIN to SCART cable for the HAS and use that into your OSSC. So that way you could take advantage of the low pass filter, not worry about any of this, because the OSSC is designed to accept a SCART signal. So if you have that voltage on it, the pin goes to nothing. You don't have to worry about that. But that one's up to you. If you already have the cable, I mean, I would probably just plug it in and try it, which is not good advice to give other people, but I just can't imagine a scenario in which anybody would add voltage to that scenario for the 8-pin MiniDIN to VGA style adapter. But that's just me. Value your equipment. Don't do this stuff without double checking. And if you want to give it a try, let me know either way, but I wanted to give you like the full rundown of that. Well, that's it for this time. I still only 2/3 of the way done with my first beer of the evening, so I think I should be okay with this one, but I am kind of tired, so my apologies if I screwed any of this up. I really enjoy doing these, so please don't think I like half-assed it or just squeezed it in. This was just one of those things that I thought, hey, I'm in the mood to do the Q&As. It would be a lot of fun to do that right now and free up some time to do some crazy testing on OLED displays tomorrow. So hopefully I didn't mess this one up. But anyway, any questions you have at all, please just ask them wherever it is you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, it's kind of hard to figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through and answering them off the cuff as if we were hanging out, having a drink at an expo somewhere or something. So any questions, fire away. And of course, and as always, thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way at all, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.